Billionaire was ready to start over, until a trip made him meet his ex with twins. Welcome to Secrets Narrated. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. When the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10 and share what you felt along the way. And if you enjoy emotional stories filled with twists and hidden truths, make sure to follow Secrets Narrated so you don't miss the next one. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy every detail. Caleb Harrington stared at the departure board at JFK Airport, his fingers gripping the handle of a single black duffel bag. At 41, he had everything most men dreamed of: a billion-dollar logistics empire, penthouse views of Manhattan, respect from peers who feared his business acumen. Yet standing in Terminal 4, surrounded by families rushing toward vacations and couples stealing kisses before goodbyes, he felt utterly hollow. The anxiety medication sat heavy in his jacket pocket, a reminder of the breakdown that had brought him to his knees 6 months ago. Dr. Reynolds had been clear. "You're running on empty, Caleb. When did you last take a real break?" The answer had been embarrassing. He couldn't remember. His phone buzzed insistently. Marcus, his CFO, probably panicking about the quarterly projections. Caleb switched it off entirely, something he hadn't done in over a decade. The silence felt foreign, almost threatening. Flight 447 to Miami now boarding all passengers. As he walked toward the gate, Caleb's reflection caught in the terminal windows. Tall frame still commanding despite the exhaustion, brown hair now touched with silver at the temples, green eyes that used to burn with ambition now dulled by years of pursuing everything except what mattered. He looked successful, he looked powerful, he looked utterly lost. The plane lifted off, carrying him away from the empire he'd built and the life he'd constructed so meticulously. But as New York's skyline disappeared below the clouds, one thought surfaced with painful clarity, the same thought that had haunted him every single day for 4 years. Maren. Even now, 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, he could see her face with devastating precision, the way her blonde hair caught morning light when she'd bring him coffee in bed, her laugh when he'd surprise her with terrible jokes during long work calls, the way she'd trace patterns on his chest when they'd talk about their future, a future that had crumbled the day she walked out. He'd thrown himself into work after she left, convincing himself that success would fill the void. Board meetings became his church, acquisitions his salvation. But in quiet moments like this, when he couldn't hide behind spreadsheets and strategy sessions, the truth emerged like a wound that refused to heal. Nothing, no deal, no victory, no amount of zeros in his bank account had ever come close to the happiness he'd felt with her. The flight attendant offered him champagne, but Caleb declined. Alcohol only made the memories sharper, more painful. He'd learned that lesson the hard way during countless sleepless nights when he'd call her old number, knowing it was disconnected, just to hear her voicemail one more time. 3.5 hours later, Miami's humidity hit him like a wall as he stepped off the plane. He'd chosen Florida on impulse, somewhere warm, somewhere different, somewhere that held no memories of them. At the rental counter, he deliberately chose a modest sedan instead of the luxury car his assistant usually arranged. This trip was about stripping away everything that defined him, finding whatever remained underneath. The GPS guided him toward the coast, but his mind wandered to their last real conversation. They'd been in their apartment kitchen, morning light streaming through windows that overlooked Central Park. She'd been wearing his NYU t-shirt, hair messy from sleep, looking more beautiful than she'd ever had any right to. "I feel like I'm living with a ghost," she'd said, her voice soft but determined. "You're here, but you're not really here. We make love, but you're thinking about Shanghai. We talk, but you're planning presentations. I'm lonely, Caleb, even when you're right next to me." He'd promised to change, of course, he'd meant it too. But by the time he'd cleared his schedule for the weekend getaway she'd been planning for months, she was gone. Her key on the kitchen counter, half her closet empty, a note that simply said, "I can't wait for you to choose us anymore." The hotel appeared ahead, a mid-range place with weathered shutters and a view of the ocean. Nothing like the 5-star establishments he typically frequented. Perfect. After checking in, Caleb stood on the small balcony overlooking the beach. Families dotted the sand below, children building castles while parents watched with the particular exhaustion that comes from pure love. A couple walked hand in hand along the water's edge, stopping occasionally to kiss like they were the only two people in the world. His chest tightened with a familiar ache. He'd imagined moments like these with Maren countless times during the separation. Lazy beach days, her hand in his, talking about everything except work. Maybe kids of their own someday, teaching them to swim in waters like these. But Maren had vanished completely after leaving New York. No mutual friends knew where she'd gone. Her professional contacts led nowhere. It was as if she'd decided to erase every trace of their life together, including herself. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Caleb pulled out his phone to capture the view, then stopped. Who would he send it to? Who cared about his sunset, his journey, his attempts to heal? Instead, he simply stood there, letting the Florida breeze carry away 4 years of accumulated tension. Tomorrow, he'd explore, maybe drive the coast, find some small town where nobody knew his name or his net worth. For now, it was enough to breathe without checking his email, to exist without an agenda. But as the first stars appeared over the water, that familiar whisper returned to his mind, soft but insistent. What if she's somewhere out there, watching this same sky? The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it left him wondering if some distances were simply too vast to cross, no matter how desperately you wanted to try. Would he ever find the courage to truly let go? Maren Whitfield's alarm buzzed at 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes before her twins would inevitably wake up demanding breakfast, stories, and her undivided attention. She'd learned to steal those precious moments of silence, lying in bed watching the Florida sunrise filter through gauze curtains, preparing mentally for another day of being everything to everyone. At 34, she bore little resemblance to the woman who'd fled New York 4 years ago. Her blonde hair, once styled meticulously for corporate meetings, now fell in natural waves past her shoulders. The sharp business suits had been replaced by flowing sundresses and comfortable sandals. But the most significant change wasn't visible. It was the quiet strength that radiated from her movements, born from years of navigating single motherhood without a roadmap. "Mama, Mama, Noah took my elephant." Elise's indignant voice carried from the nursery, followed immediately by Noah's defensive protests. Maren smiled despite herself. Every morning started with some variation of this drama. She padded barefoot across the hardwood floors of their modest 3-bedroom house in Clearwater. The space was nothing like the Manhattan penthouse she'd shared with Caleb. No marble countertops or floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Instead, colorful artwork covered the walls. Toys scattered across surfaces and photographs captured every milestone she'd celebrated alone. "Good morning, my loves," she whispered, entering the nursery to find Noah clutching a stuffed elephant while Elise glared at him with impressive 3-year-old fury. They were beautiful children. Noah with his father's intense green eyes and serious expression, Elise with the same green gaze but Maren's adventurous spirit. Looking at them never failed to trigger a complex cocktail of emotions: joy, fierce protectiveness, overwhelming love, but also a persistent ache for the man who'd never seen them take their first steps, heard their first words, or kissed their scraped knees. "How about we make pancakes together?" Maren suggested, successfully diverting their attention from the elephant dispute. "Noah, you can crack the eggs. Elise, you can measure the milk." The kitchen came alive with their chatter as they helped prepare breakfast. Maren had become an expert at these small domestic routines, finding rhythm in the chaos of raising twins alone. Coffee brewed while she supervised their culinary assistants, preventing major disasters while encouraging their independence. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant at the educational consulting firm she'd built from scratch. "Mrs. Patterson wants to move the assessment to tomorrow. Is that possible?" Maren had discovered her calling in childhood development after the twins were born. Something about understanding young minds, helping them overcome learning challenges, felt deeply meaningful. Her company, Bright Foundations, had grown steadily over 3 years, serving families throughout the Tampa Bay area. "Mama, why don't we have a daddy like Emma at school?" Noah asked suddenly, his spoon halfway to his mouth, syrup dripping onto his pajamas. The question hit like a physical blow, even though she'd been expecting it. Both children had started noticing family structures during playdates and school events. She'd practiced her response countless times, but it never got easier. "Some families look different, sweetheart," she said carefully, wiping syrup from his chin. "We're a family of 3, and that's perfect for us. Love doesn't come in just one shape." Elise nodded seriously, as if this explanation made complete sense to her 3-year-old logic. But Noah's expression remained thoughtful, processing information with the same analytical intensity she remembered from his father. After breakfast, Maren loaded them into her reliable Honda SUV for the drive to Little Learner's preschool. The routine was familiar. Songs in the car, last-minute reminders about sharing and using indoor voices, kisses goodbye that had to be distributed equally or risk emotional meltdown. "See you at pickup, my babies," she called, watching them run toward their classroom with the fearless enthusiasm of children who'd never known anything but love. The drive to her office gave Maren time to think, something she both craved and feared. Her life in Florida was good, stable, meaningful, filled with purpose. She'd created a successful business, raised remarkable children, built friendships with other single parents who understood the unique challenges of solo parenting. But sometimes, in quiet moments like these, she allowed herself to remember the man who'd given her the greatest gifts of her life without ever knowing it. The pregnancy had been discovered in the most traumatic way possible. 3 months after leaving New York, she'd started bleeding heavily during a consultation with a new client. The emergency room visit that changed everything. Ultrasound images showing 2 tiny heartbeats. The doctor explaining she was carrying twins. The overwhelming realization that Caleb was going to be a father. She'd tried to call him that night, fingers shaking as she dialed his number, but his phone went straight to voicemail, as it had for weeks. His assistant claimed he was in meetings, traveling, unreachable. The same patterns that had driven her away now prevented him from learning about his children. After 3 days of unsuccessful attempts, Maren made a decision that still haunted her quiet moments. She would raise these babies alone rather than force herself back into a life that had slowly suffocated her soul. Now, pulling into her office parking lot, she wondered for the 1,000th time if she'd made the right choice. Noah had Caleb's analytical mind, his way of studying problems until he understood every angle. Elise possessed his stubborn determination, refusing to give up when something captured her interest. They deserved to know their father, but they also deserved better than the distracted, work-obsessed man she'd left behind. Her phone buzzed again, this time a photo from the preschool showing both twins building an elaborate block tower together. Their teamwork was extraordinary, each child complementing the other's strengths with natural ease, just like their parents once did, Maren thought, then immediately pushed the memory away. Some chapters of life were meant to stay closed, no matter how beautiful they'd once been. She gathered her files and headed into the office, unaware that 200 miles away the man who'd never stopped loving her was driving south along the same coastline, carried by currents neither of them could control toward a collision that would change everything. Again, Caleb woke to the sound of seagulls and children's laughter filtering through his hotel window. For the first time in years, he'd slept past 6 a.m. without an alarm, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion he'd been carrying for too long. The unfamiliar sensation of rest felt almost foreign. He ordered room service instead of rushing to a business breakfast, another small rebellion against his former life. Coffee arrived with fresh fruit and pastries, nothing like the protein bars and energy drinks that had fueled his Manhattan mornings. As he ate on the balcony, watching families set up beach umbrellas below, his phone remained deliberately silent in the dresser drawer. The rental car GPS suggested several coastal routes, but Caleb chose to drive without destination. The highway stretched ahead, lined with palm trees and glimpses of turquoise water. For the first time in 4 years, he had nowhere to be, no one waiting for his decisions. Yet even in this freedom, Maren's ghost rode passenger seat. He'd imagined road trips like this with her countless times during sleepless nights in his empty penthouse. Weekend getaways to places where they could walk hand in hand without photographers or business associates intruding. Simple moments they'd never managed to steal when work consumed his every waking hour. The highway led him north toward Clearwater, though he didn't know why he chose that direction. Something about the name appealed to him. Clearwater, fresh starts, washing away the past. He pulled into a beachside cafe around noon, drawn by its weathered wooden sign and the promise of world's best key lime pie. Inside, the atmosphere was relaxed and welcoming. Families occupied most tables, children coloring on paper placemats while parents enjoyed unhurried conversations. A corner booth caught his eye, offering views of the beach through salt-stained windows. "You're not from around here," observed the waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a knowing smile. "Business or pleasure?" "Neither," Caleb replied, surprising himself with the honesty. "Just figuring things out." She nodded as if this explanation made perfect sense. "Those are sometimes the best trips. What can I get you?" He ordered the grouper sandwich and, at her insistence, a slice of the famous key lime pie. While waiting, he watched the beach through the window. A young mother was helping two small children build an elaborate sandcastle, their concentration absolute as they worked together to create something beautiful and temporary. The scene triggered a memory so vivid, he nearly gasped aloud. Maren, 7 months into their relationship, had dragged him to a pottery class despite his protests about work deadlines. Her hands had guided his on the clay wheel, her laughter infectious as their simple bowl became a lopsided disaster. "It's not about perfection," she'd whispered against his ear, her breath warm and distracting. "It's about creating something together, even if it falls apart." They'd kept that crooked bowl on their kitchen counter, using it for keys and loose change. He wondered if she'd taken it when she left or if it still sat in his apartment, gathering dust along with his regrets. The food arrived, interrupting his reverie. The grouper was perfectly seasoned, the key lime pie a revelation of tart sweetness that made him understand the cafe's reputation. But more than the meal, he appreciated the absence of urgency. No one rushed him to finish, no phones buzzed with emergencies, no assistant hovered with the next crisis requiring his immediate attention. After lunch, he walked the beach, letting sand fill his Italian leather shoes without caring about the damage. Children raced past him chasing seagulls, their joy uncomplicated and infectious. An elderly couple sat on a driftwood log, sharing a thermos of coffee and watching the waves with the comfortable silence of people who'd weathered decades together. This could have been us, he thought, imagining himself and Maren at 70, still finding wonder in simple moments. The life he'd sacrificed for quarterly reports and board meetings suddenly seemed utterly insignificant compared to what he'd lost. His phone had been silent for nearly 24 hours now, a personal record since college. Marcus had probably orchestrated a search party by now, convinced his CEO had suffered some kind of breakdown. The irony wasn't lost on Caleb that it had taken a breakdown for him to finally start healing. A family nearby was packing up their beach gear, and the father swept a giggling toddler onto his shoulders. The child's delighted squeals carried on the ocean breeze, and Caleb felt his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. Longing, maybe, or grief for a future that existed only in his imagination. He'd always assumed there would be time for children later, after the next acquisition, the next merger, the next impossible goal achieved. Maren had mentioned kids occasionally, usually while watching friends' families or passing baby stores, but he'd deflected those conversations with promises of someday and when things settle down. Now, at 41, he realized how naive that thinking had been. Life didn't wait for convenient moments. Love didn't pause while you climbed corporate ladders. The most important opportunities often came disguised as ordinary Tuesday afternoons or quiet Sunday mornings, moments he'd been too distracted to recognize. The afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold. Caleb found himself walking north along the shoreline, letting the waves wash over his feet. Other beachgoers dotted the sand, joggers, couples, families making the most of the perfect weather. In the distance, he could see a woman sitting alone near the water's edge, watching two small children play in the shallow waves. Something about her posture struck him as familiar, the way she tucked her hair behind one ear when the breeze caught it, the graceful curve of her shoulders. His heart stopped. For a moment, time suspended itself between one wave and the next. The woman turned slightly, giving him a clearer view of her profile, and Caleb's world tilted on its axis. Even from 50 yards away, even after 4 years of changes and heartbreak, he would recognize that face anywhere. Maren. His feet moved without conscious thought, carrying him across the sand toward the woman who'd haunted his dreams and shaped his every regret. As he drew closer, the children's laughter reached him, bright, innocent sounds that seemed to pierce straight through his chest. The little boy had unmistakable green eyes. The girl possessed the same determined expression he remembered seeing in his own childhood photographs. Reality crashed over him like a rogue wave, stealing his breath and leaving him gasping for understanding. Those weren't just any children playing in the Florida surf. They were his. The sand felt unsteady beneath Caleb's feet as he approached, each step bringing him closer to a moment that would shatter everything he thought he knew about the last 4 years. Maren sat with her knees drawn up, wearing a flowing white sundress that caught the afternoon breeze. Her blonde hair was longer now, sun-kissed and natural, framing a face that had matured into even greater beauty. She was watching the children with the intense focus of a mother who'd never had the luxury of shared responsibility. The little boy was building an elaborate castle, his concentration absolute as he patted wet sand into towers. The girl danced at the water's edge, squealing with delight each time waves chased her back up the beach. 20 feet away, Caleb stopped walking. His heart hammered so violently he was certain it would burst from his chest. 4 years of wondering where she was, if she was happy, whether she ever thought of him, and here she sat as if conjured from his desperate prayers. The little girl noticed him first. She paused in her dancing and tilted her head with curious green eyes that were unmistakably his own. Her smile was radiant and fearless, the way children smiled at the world before learning to be cautious. "Mama," she called, tugging on Marin's arm. "There's a man looking at us." Marin turned and time stopped completely. Her blue eyes widened, color draining from her face as recognition hit like a physical blow. For several heartbeats, neither moved. 4 years collapsed into nothing. Every fight, every silent dinner, every night she'd slept turned away from him, and every moment since when he'd ached for just one more chance to hold her. Caleb. His name escaped her lips as barely a whisper, carried away by the ocean breeze. He managed a single step forward, then another, until he stood close enough to see the gold flecks in her eyes that he'd memorized during countless mornings waking up beside her. She looked older, but in the way that suggested wisdom rather than weariness. There was a strength in her posture he didn't remember, born from years of facing challenges alone. "Marin," he said, his voice rough with emotions he couldn't begin to name. "I can't believe you're here." The children had stopped playing, sensing the sudden tension in the air. The little boy approached his mother with protective instincts that reminded Caleb painfully of himself at that age. The girl remained curious, studying Caleb with frank assessment. "Who is he, Mama?" the boy asked, moving to stand between Caleb and Marin like a miniature guardian. Marin's hand went to her son's shoulder, and Caleb saw her fingers trembling slightly. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled, though he could hear the tremor underneath. This is Caleb," she said. "Mama knew him a long time ago." Caleb's gaze moved between the children, taking in details that hit him like successive punches. The boy had his own stubborn cowlick, the same one that had driven his mother crazy when he was young. The girl possessed Marin's delicate features, but his own determined chin. They were beautiful, healthy, happy, and they belonged to him. "How old are they?" he asked, though he already knew the answer would destroy him. 3.5, Marin replied, her voice barely audible. The math was simple and devastating. 3.5 years old meant they'd been conceived right before she left, during those last desperate weeks when they'd been trying to save their marriage through passion instead of communication. She'd been pregnant when she walked away, carrying his children while he buried himself in work, too proud and hurt to chase after her. "You were pregnant," he said, the words heavy with dawning comprehension. "When you left, you were—" "I didn't know," Marin said quickly, glancing at the children who were listening intently. "Not until later. Not until—" She trailed off, but Caleb could fill in the blanks. She'd discovered the pregnancy alone, faced morning sickness alone, felt their first kicks alone. She'd given birth alone, brought them home to an empty house, and spent 3.5 years being their entire world. The magnitude of what he'd missed hit him with crushing force. First words, first steps, first day of school, countless bedtime stories, scraped knees kissed better, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, a lifetime of moments that could never be recovered. "I tried to call," Marin said, her composure finally cracking. "That first week when I found out. Your phone went to voicemail. Your assistant said you were traveling, in meetings, unreachable. I tried for 3 days, Caleb. 3 days of calling and getting nowhere." He remembered those days now with sickening clarity. He'd been in Tokyo closing the Yamamoto deal, his phone set to silent during crucial negotiations. When he'd seen her missed calls, he'd assumed she wanted to fight more, to drag him through another painful conversation about his failures as a husband. Pride and exhaustion had kept him from calling back. "My God," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. Mama, why are you crying?" the little girl asked, abandoning the waves to wrap her arms around Marin's neck. Marin wiped her eyes quickly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach them. "I'm okay, baby. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're surprised." The boy continued studying Caleb with intelligent green eyes that seemed to see straight through him. "Are you our daddy?" he asked, with the blunt directness only children could manage. The question hung in the salt air between them. Marin's breath caught audibly. Caleb felt his knees nearly buckle under the weight of 3 simple words that changed everything. "Yes," he said, his voice breaking. "I think, yes, I am." The girl, His daughter looked between them with bright curiosity. "Does that mean you're going to live with us now?" The innocent question shattered whatever composure any of them had left. Maren pressed her face against her daughter's hair, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Caleb sank to his knees in the sand, overwhelmed by grief and joy and a love so fierce it physically hurt. "What are your names?" he managed to ask. "I'm Noah," the boy said solemnly. "This is my sister Elise. We're twins." Noah and Elise. His children had names, personalities, favorite toys probably, foods they loved and hated. They had inside jokes with their mother and bedtime routines he'd never witnessed. They were complete little people who'd existed their entire lives without him. The sun was setting behind them, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Other beach families were packing up for the day, but the four of them remained frozen in this moment of impossible reunion. "We need to talk," Maren said finally, her voice thick with tears. "But not here. Not like this." Caleb nodded, unable to trust his voice. He watched as she gathered their beach toys with practiced efficiency, as Noah helped his sister brush sand from her feet, as they moved together with the seamless coordination of a family unit he'd never been part of. "There's a cafe down the beach," Maren said without looking at him. "Sunset Pier. Tomorrow at noon after I drop them at school. Can you—" "I'll be there," he promised. As they walked away, Elise turned back to wave at him, her smile radiant and trusting. "Bye, Daddy," she called, as if she'd been saying it her whole life. Caleb remained kneeling in the sand long after they disappeared from view, watching the waves wash away the evidence of this moment, while the truth carved itself permanently into his heart. He was a father, had been for 3.5 years without knowing it, and tomorrow he would have to figure out how to deserve that title. Caleb arrived at Sunset Pier Cafe 20 minutes early, his hand shaking as he gripped a cup of black coffee that had long since gone cold. He'd barely slept, replaying yesterday's encounter in an endless loop. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elise's trusting wave and Noah's protective stance. Two children who existed because of choices he'd made and moments he'd missed. The cafe buzzed with lunch hour activity, tourists studying menus, locals catching up over sandwiches, families sharing plates of fish and chips. Through salt-stained windows, he watched boats bobbing in the marina, their masts swaying in rhythm with waves that seemed far more peaceful than the storm raging in his chest. At exactly noon, Maren walked through the door. She'd dressed carefully, a soft blue blouse that brought out her eyes, dark jeans, minimal makeup that couldn't hide the exhaustion around her features. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, revealing the graceful line of her neck he'd once kissed every morning. She moved through the crowded restaurant with quiet confidence, scanning tables until her gaze found his. The walk to his corner booth lasted forever and no time at all. When she slid into the seat across from him, the familiar scent of her perfume, something light and floral, transported him instantly to Sunday mornings in their old apartment, when the biggest worry was whether to order breakfast in or venture out for bagels. "You look good," she said quietly, her hands folded carefully on the table between them. "So do you," he replied, meaning it completely. "Different, but good. Strong." A waitress appeared, breaking the tension momentarily as Maren ordered iced tea and a Caesar salad. When they were alone again, silence stretched between them like a chasm neither knew how to cross. "I dropped them at school this morning," Maren said finally. Noah asked if the man from the beach was coming to pick them up. Elise spent 10 minutes choosing her favorite dress because she wanted to look pretty for her daddy. Each word hit Caleb like a physical blow. "What did you tell them?" "The truth, as much as they can understand. That you're their father, that you didn't know about them, and that grown-ups sometimes need time to figure out complicated things." She paused, studying his face. "They're not angry, Caleb. Children don't carry grudges the way adults do. They just want to understand where they fit in the world." "And where do I fit?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "In their world, I mean. In your world." Maren's composure faltered slightly. "I don't know. 4 years ago, I thought I knew exactly what our life would look like. 2 years ago, I was certain I'd raise them alone forever. Yesterday morning, the possibility of you being here seemed as likely as snow in July." Their food arrived, giving them both a moment to collect themselves. Caleb watched Maren pick at her salad, noting how she ate with the efficient precision of someone accustomed to grabbing meals between crises, a skill he remembered from her early consulting days. "Tell me about the pregnancy," he said gently. "About finding out, about everything I missed." Maren set down her fork, her eyes growing distant. "I found out in the emergency room. I'd been bleeding, Thought I was miscarrying something I didn't even know existed. The ultrasound technician got this look on her face, and I knew something was different. Then she turned the screen toward me and said, "Congratulations. You're having twins." Caleb's throat tightened. "Were you alone?" "Completely. I'd made one friend in Arizona, Sarah, my neighbor, but we barely knew each other then. I sat in that hospital room for 3 hours, staring at ultrasound pictures and trying to figure out how to tell you." She met his eyes. "I called 17 times over 3 days, Caleb. 17 times. I was in Tokyo," he said, the excuse sounding pathetic even to himself. "The Yamamoto acquisition was falling apart, and I'd turned my phone off during negotiations. When I saw the missed calls later, I assumed—" "You assumed I was calling to fight more," Marin finished. "I know. I figured that out when your assistant kept telling me you were in meetings indefinitely. That's when I realized nothing had really changed. Everything would have changed if I'd known." "Would it?" Marin's voice carried no accusation, only exhaustion. "Or would you have flown back for a weekend, set up trust funds, hired the best doctors, and then returned to Tokyo because the deal was too important to abandon?" The accuracy of her prediction shamed him. That probably would have been exactly his response. Throw money at the problem, ensure everyone was taken care of financially, then return to the life that felt safer than intimacy. "You're right," he admitted. 4 years ago, that's probably what I would have done, but Marin, I'm not that man anymore. Aren't you? She studied his face carefully. What changed? Losing you changed everything. The breakdown 6 months ago changed everything. Realizing that I built an empire but couldn't build a marriage changed everything. He leaned forward, desperate for her to understand. I haven't worked a weekend in 8 months. I'm in therapy twice a week. I take medication for anxiety now because the stress of losing you literally made me sick. Something shifted in her expression. Not forgiveness, but perhaps a recognition that people could evolve. The children ask about you sometimes, she said. Not often, but Noah especially. He's analytical like you were. He wants to understand why some kids have daddies who live with them and some don't. I've tried to explain without making you the villain. Maybe I should be the villain in their story. No, Marin said firmly. Whatever mistakes you made, whatever I went through, none of that is their burden to carry. They deserve to know their father as he is now, not who he was 4 years ago. Caleb felt tears threaten for the second time in 24 hours. I want to be in their lives, Marin. I want to learn their favorite foods and read them bedtime stories and teach them to ride bikes. I want to be more than a monthly check and birthday cards. And I want that for them too, she said softly. But it can't be part-time fatherhood when it's convenient for you. It can't be grand gestures and expensive gifts to make up for missed time. They need consistency, reliability, someone who shows up even when it's boring or difficult. I know that. I'm ready for that. Are you? Marin challenged. Ready to leave board meetings for school plays? Ready to spend Christmas morning building block castles instead of reviewing quarterly projections? Ready to put 2 small people's needs ahead of everything else in your life? Yes, he said without hesitation. I'll move here, Marin. I'll relocate the business, find a place nearby, whatever it takes. They live with me, she said carefully. I've been their world for 3.5 years. I won't disrupt that stability, no matter how guilty you feel or how much money you have. I'm not trying to take them away from you. I just want to be part of their family. The word hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to explore. Family meant more than shared DNA. It meant breakfast conversations and homework help and middle-of-the-night comfort when nightmares struck. We'll start slowly, Marin decided. Supervised visits, activities together. Let them get used to having you around. If you prove you're serious about this, if you show them the consistency they need, then we'll figure out a more permanent arrangement. Caleb nodded eagerly. Whatever you think is best. Whatever they need. There's something else, Marin said, her voice dropping. They're going to ask questions eventually. About why you weren't there before, about whether you and I will get back together, about things I can't answer for you. The possibility of reconciliation sparked something dangerous in Caleb's chest, but he pushed it down. This wasn't about second chances for them. It was about first chances for his children. I'll answer honestly, age appropriately, he promised. And Marin, about us. There is no us, she said quickly, but not unkindly. There's co-parenting. There's helping them adjust to having a father. There's figuring out holidays and birthdays and logistics. But there's no us. He wanted to argue, to tell her that yesterday on the beach he'd felt more alive than he had in 4 years. But the set of her jaw told him this boundary wasn't negotiable, at least not now. "When can I see them again?" he asked. "Tomorrow is Saturday. There's a children's museum in Tampa they love. We could meet there, spend a few hours together. Let them show you around, get comfortable with you in their space." "I'll be there." Maren gathered her purse, preparing to leave. "Caleb, don't hurt them. Please. They've never known disappointment from a parent, and I won't let you be their first experience with that." "I won't," he promised. "I swear to you, I won't." After she left, Caleb sat alone in the cafe for another hour, watching the afternoon crowd thin out as the weight of responsibility settled over him like a mantle. He had children, brilliant, beautiful children who deserved better than his track record suggested he could provide. But for the first time in 4 years, he had something worth fighting for that wasn't measured in profit margins or market share. He had the chance to be the father Noah and Elise needed, even if he could never be the husband Maren deserved. The Tampa Children's Museum parking lot buzzed with weekend energy. Minivans disgorging excited children, parents juggling snacks and strollers, the kind of organized chaos Caleb had observed from a distance but never participated in. He sat in his rental car, gripping the steering wheel and trying to calm nerves that felt more intense than any boardroom presentation he'd ever given. Through the entrance windows, he spotted them before they saw him. Maren walked between Noah and Elise, holding their hands as they practically bounced with anticipation. Both children wore bright t-shirts and sneakers that had clearly seen plenty of playground adventures. Noah carried a small backpack covered in dinosaur patches, while Elise clutched a worn stuffed elephant. When Caleb approached the entrance, Elise broke free from her mother's hand and ran toward him with the fearless enthusiasm only 3-year-olds possessed. "Daddy, you came?" she exclaimed, wrapping her small arms around his legs in a hug that nearly knocked him over emotionally. Caleb knelt to her level, his throat tight with overwhelming affection for this tiny person who'd accepted him so completely. "Of course I came, sweetheart. I promised I would." Noah approached more cautiously, studying Caleb with intelligent green eyes that missed nothing. "Are you really going to stay this time?" he asked with the directness that made Caleb's heart ache. "I'm not going anywhere," Caleb promised, meeting his son's gaze steadily. "I want to spend time with you and your sister if that's okay with you." Noah considered this seriously, then nodded once, a gesture so reminiscent of Caleb's own decision-making process that Maren actually smiled. The museum's interior was a wonderland of interactive exhibits designed to capture young imaginations. Water tables where children could experiment with currents and dams, a miniature grocery store complete with shopping carts and play food, construction zones with kid-sized hard hats and building blocks. "Where should we start?" Caleb asked, genuinely overwhelmed by the options. "The dinosaur exhibit," Noah declared immediately. "They have a T-Rex you can control with buttons. And then the Princess Castle," Elise added, tugging on Caleb's hand. "I can show you where the dragon lives." Caleb looked to Maren, who was watching the interaction with careful attention. "Sounds like we have a plan," she said softly. The dinosaur exhibit proved to be Noah's domain. He knew every species name, could recite facts about their diets and habitats with the precision of a young paleontologist. Caleb found himself genuinely fascinated, not just by the information, but by his son's passionate expertise. "This one is an Allosaurus," Noah explained, pointing to a replica skeleton. It was a carnivore, but smaller than T-Rex. It used its claws more than its teeth for hunting. "How do you know so much about dinosaurs?" Caleb asked, crouching beside him. "I read books about them. Mama gets them from the library every week." Noah glanced up at him. "Do you like dinosaurs too?" "I'm learning to," Caleb admitted. "Maybe you could teach me more sometime?" For the first time, Noah's serious expression softened into something approaching a smile. Meanwhile, Elise had discovered the interactive T-Rex and was delightedly making it roar by pressing various buttons. Her giggles echoed through the exhibit hall, drawing smiles from other families nearby. "She's fearless," Caleb observed to Maren. "Sometimes to a fault," Maren replied, but her tone was affectionate. "Last month she tried to pet a German shepherd at the park because she was convinced all dogs were as friendly as the stuffed animals in her room." And Noah? Cautious, analytical. He watches everything, processes it, then makes careful decisions. He's been asking questions about you since yesterday. Not emotional questions, but practical ones. Where you live, what your job is, whether you know how to make pancakes. The specificity of that last question made Caleb laugh. "Do I pass the pancake test?" "We'll find out eventually, I suppose." After dinosaurs, they moved to Elise's preferred destination, a fairy tale castle complete with dress-up costumes and a puppet theater. She immediately appointed herself director of their impromptu performance, assigning roles with the absolute authority only small children could wield. "Daddy, you're the knight," she announced, draping a plastic cape over his shoulders. "Noah, you're the wise wizard. Mama is the beautiful queen." Caleb caught Marin's eye as she accepted her costume crown, and for a moment something passed between them. Not romance exactly, but recognition of the family they were creating, however unconventionally. The puppet show that followed was gloriously chaotic. Elise narrated an elaborate story involving dragons, lost princesses, and magical solutions to every problem. Noah provided sound effects with the serious dedication he brought to everything. Caleb found himself fully invested in his knightly role, ad-libbing dialogue that made both children dissolve into giggles. "The dragon has captured the princess," Elise announced dramatically. "What will the brave knight do?" "I'll rescue her," Caleb declared, making his puppet knight bow deeply. No princess should be sad when there are people who love her nearby to help. Something in his delivery made Marin glance at him sharply, but the moment passed as Elise launched into the climactic battle scene. After the castle, they explored the art station, where both children created masterpieces with finger paints and glitter. Noah worked methodically, creating a geometric pattern in blues and greens. Elise approached art like she approached everything else, with joyful abandon, resulting in a rainbow explosion that somehow managed to be beautiful in its exuberance. "This is for you, Daddy," she said, presenting her glitter-encrusted creation with pride. Caleb accepted the artwork like it was a priceless artifact. "It's the most beautiful painting I've ever seen," he said honestly. "Can I keep it forever?" "Yes. You can hang it in your house so you remember us." The innocence of her assumption, that of course he would want to remember them, that of course this mattered, hit him unexpectedly hard. Lunch in the museum cafe proved to be another adventure. Both children had strong opinions about food that had clearly been negotiated through months of trial and error with Marin. Noah wanted his sandwich cut into triangles, not squares. Elise would only drink chocolate milk if it came with a bendy straw. "They're very particular," Marin said apologetically as she performed the complex ritual of proper lunch preparation. "They know what they like," Caleb replied. "That's not a bad thing." During lunch, Noah surprised him with a direct question. "Do you have a house here now?" "I'm staying in a hotel," Caleb admitted, "but I'm thinking about finding a place nearby if your mom thinks that's a good idea." Noah considered this seriously. "Would we be able to visit you there?" The hope in his voice made Caleb's chest tighten. "I would like that very much. Maybe we could pick out some books about dinosaurs for when you come over. And dress-up clothes," Elise added. "Every house needs dress-up clothes." As the afternoon wound down, Caleb realized he'd spent 4 hours completely absorbed in his children's world, without once thinking about work, deals, or the empire waiting for him back in New York. The revelation was both shocking and liberating. Outside the museum, as they prepared to part ways, Elise threw her arms around his waist again. "Will you come to my school next week?" she asked. "We're having a daddy-daughter lunch." Caleb's heart stopped. He looked at Marin, who appeared equally surprised by the invitation. "We don't have to," Marin began. "I want to," Caleb said quickly. "If it's okay with you, I would be honored to come to your daddy-daughter lunch." Noah, not to be left out, added, "I have a science project about space. Maybe you could help me." "I would love to help with your space project," Caleb promised. As they drove away, Marin's practical SUV heading north while his rental car sat idle in the parking lot, Caleb remained standing in the afternoon sunshine, holding Elise's glittery artwork, and feeling like his entire life had been reorganized around two small people who'd existed without him for 3.5 years, but now seemed essential to his very survival. For the first time since the divorce, the future looked like something worth building, instead of something to merely endure. 3 weeks had passed since the museum, and Caleb's life had been completely reorganized around tiny schedules and unexpected emergencies. He'd extended his hotel stay indefinitely, turned down 2 acquisition meetings, and discovered that children operated on a timeline that bore no resemblance to corporate efficiency. This Tuesday morning proved that point spectacularly. Marin's call came at 6:47 a.m., her voice tight with stress. "Caleb, I know this is last minute, but my babysitter just canceled and I have a crucial client presentation in Tampa. Could you possibly—" "Yes," he said before she finished the question, already reaching for clothes. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. They haven't had breakfast yet, And Noah's been fighting a cold and Elise has preschool at 9 and… Marin, Caleb interrupted gently. I've got this. Go get ready for your presentation. The confidence in his voice was mostly fabricated, but he'd learned that parenting required a certain amount of fake-it-until-you-make-it bravado. When he arrived at Marin's house, she was rushing around in professional mode, blazer half-buttoned, presentation materials scattered across the kitchen counter, coffee mug clutched like a lifeline. Noah's congested, so he might be cranky, she said, grabbing her keys. Elise needs her permission slip for the field trip signed, and she has to wear her red shoes or she'll have a meltdown. Lunch money is on the counter. Pickup is at 3:15 sharp, and… Mom, Noah's voice called from upstairs. I can't find my dinosaur book. It's in the laundry room, Marin called back, then turned to Caleb. He reads it every morning at breakfast. It's part of his routine. Caleb nodded, trying to absorb the flood of information while simultaneously retrieving the book and helping Elise, who had appeared in the kitchen wearing pajamas and one red shoe. Where's my other shoe? Elise asked, hopping around on one foot. We'll find it, Caleb assured her, though he had no idea where to start looking. Marin kissed both children goodbye, a ritual that involved specific hugs, nose boops, and promises about what they'd do after school. When she reached the door, she paused and looked back at Caleb with an expression he couldn't quite read. Call me if you need anything, she said. Anything at all. We'll be fine, Caleb promised, hoping he was right. The door closed behind her, and suddenly he was alone with two small people who were looking at him expectantly. Noah clutched his dinosaur book, sniffling slightly. Elise continued her one-shoe hop dance. Okay, Caleb said, channeling the calm authority he used in board meetings. First things first, breakfast. I want pancakes, Elise announced. We don't have time for pancakes, Noah said practically. Mama usually makes us cereal or toast. Caleb opened cabinets, discovering an impressive array of child-friendly foods he'd never considered purchasing. Cheerios, fruit pouches, organic crackers shaped like various animals. Everything designed for small hands and developing taste buds. How about scrambled eggs? He suggested. I can make those pretty fast. With cheese? Elise asked hopefully. Of course with cheese. While the eggs cooked, Caleb launched a search mission for Elise's missing shoe. He found it under the couch, along with 3 toy cars, a hairbrush, and what appeared to be a partially eaten apple from sometime last week. Daddy, I feel yucky, Noah announced from his seat at the kitchen table. Caleb felt his forehead, definitely warm. Not dangerously so, but enough to make him pause. Was this the kind of fever that required medical attention? Or the kind that meant keeping him home from school? What would Mama do if you felt yucky? Caleb asked, sitting beside him. Give me medicine and let me rest on the couch with my book, Noah said matter-of-factly. Right, medicine. Caleb found children's Tylenol in the cabinet, carefully measuring the dose according to the bottle's instructions. Noah took it without complaint, then curled up on the living room couch with his dinosaur book. Meanwhile, Elise had finished her eggs and was now insisting she needed to practice her letters before school. This involved finding her special pencils, stored in a specific drawer, her letter workbook, hidden under a pile of coloring pages, and her writing mat, a placemat with alphabet guidelines. Caleb watched in fascination as she carefully formed letters, her tongue poking out in concentration. Her A's were slightly lopsided, her S's looked more like F's, but her pride in each completed word was infectious. Look, Daddy, I wrote cat, she announced, showing him her work. That's beautiful, sweetheart. You're getting really good at writing. The morning continued with a series of small crises and surprising victories. Noah's fever broke after an hour of rest, but Caleb made the decision to keep him home anyway, a choice that earned him a relieved hug from his son. Elise's preschool drop-off went smoothly, though it took 15 minutes to complete the goodbye ritual she was accustomed to. By noon, Caleb found himself in an unexpectedly peaceful moment. Noah was napping on the couch, finally breathing clearly. Elise was at school, probably charming her teachers with stories about her new daddy. The house was quiet except for the gentle hum of the washing machine and the distant sound of neighborhood dogs barking. He called Marin during her lunch break. How did the presentation go? He asked. Better than expected. How are my babies? Noah's feeling much better. I kept him home to be safe. Elise went to school after a lengthy shoe crisis was resolved. He paused. Marin, how do you do this every day? The constant vigilance, the decision-making, being responsible for every detail of their lives? Her laugh was tired, but warm. Some days better than others. The first year was brutal. I second-guessed every choice, panicked over every sniffle, called the pediatrician so often they probably considered getting a restraining order. But you figured it out. Eventually. And you will too. Parenting isn't about being perfect, Caleb. It's about showing up, paying attention, and loving them enough to keep trying even when you have no idea what you're doing. After hanging up, Caleb looked around Marin's living room. Really looked at it for the first time. Family photos covered every surface, documenting 3.5 years of birthdays, holidays, and ordinary moments that had somehow become precious. There were pictures of first steps, first day of school, Halloween costumes, beach trips, a lifetime of memories he'd missed, but also a foundation he could build on. When Elise came home from school, she was full of stories about her day. Apparently, she'd told her entire class about her daddy who was learning to make eggs and finding lost shoes. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had asked if he would be coming to the upcoming parent-teacher conferences. "Can you come, Daddy?" Elise asked, climbing into his lap as they sat on the front porch waiting for Noah to wake up from his nap. "I want to show you my classroom and my art corner. I wouldn't miss it," Caleb promised, meaning it completely. As the afternoon sun filtered through the oak trees in Marin's front yard, Caleb felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with professional achievement or financial success. This was messier, more complicated, infinitely more meaningful. When Marin returned home at 6, she found them in the backyard. Noah was teaching Caleb the proper technique for throwing a frisbee, while Elise provided running commentary from her position as self-appointed referee. "Daddy's getting better," Elise announced as Marin approached. "He only hit the fence twice this time." Marin smiled, and for a moment, watching the three of them together, Caleb could almost imagine what their lives might have looked like if he'd been there from the beginning. But as evening approached and it came time for him to return to his hotel, the artificial nature of these visits became apparent again. He was still an outsider looking in, a guest in his children's real life. "When are you going back to New York?" Noah asked as Caleb prepared to leave. The question hung in the air between them. Caleb looked at Marin, whose expression remained carefully neutral. "I'm not sure yet," Caleb answered honestly. "Would you want me to stay here longer?" "Yes," both children said simultaneously, then looked to their mother for confirmation. Marin's silence spoke volumes. She wanted him involved in their lives, but she wasn't ready to discuss the larger implications of that involvement. As Caleb drove back to his hotel that evening, one thought dominated his mind. Temporary visits weren't going to be enough. Not for him. And certainly not for Noah and Elise, who deserved better than a part-time father who showed up when convenient. The question was whether Marin would ever trust him enough to let him stay. The call came at 5:23 a.m. on a Thursday, shattering the peaceful rhythm Caleb had settled into over the past month. Marcus's voice carried the sharp edge of crisis management. "The Shanghai deal is falling apart," his CFO announced without preamble. "Zhang is threatening to pull out entirely. The board wants you back in New York immediately." Caleb sat on the edge of his hotel bed, watching the Florida sunrise paint the sky in soft pastels. In the distance, he could see families already setting up for early morning beach walks. In 3 hours, he was supposed to help Noah with his space project presentation. "How bad is it?" Caleb asked, though he already knew the answer from Marcus's tone. 800 million bad. Zhang says the delays have shaken his confidence in our commitment. He wants to meet face-to-face by Friday, or he's taking his business to Meridian Industries. Meridian, Caleb's biggest competitor, run by his former business school roommate who'd made a career of swooping in on deals Caleb had spent months cultivating. The Shanghai acquisition wasn't just about money. It was about establishing a foothold in the Asian market that could define his company's next decade. "I can handle this remotely," Caleb said, but even as he spoke, he knew it was wishful thinking. "You know Zhang better than that. He does business on handshakes and eye contact. Video calls aren't going to save this." Caleb closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 4 years building his empire crash against 6 weeks of building something far more precious. "Give me 2 hours. I'll call you back." After hanging up, he sat in the hotel room's artificial silence, staring at his phone's screen. 17 missed calls from the New York office. 43 unread emails marked urgent. The business world he'd temporarily left behind was demanding his return, and the cost of refusing might be everything he'd worked to build. But the cost of leaving might be something even more valuable. At 7:30, he found himself at Marin's front door, dreading the conversation he was about to have. She answered wearing scrubs. She had an early consultation at a local elementary school. her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "You look terrible," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "What's wrong?" Before he could answer, Noah bounded down the stairs carrying his space project poster board, his excitement palpable. "Daddy, look, I finished the drawing of Jupiter's moons." He proudly displayed his artwork, complete with careful labels in his neat 3-year-old handwriting. "You're still coming to help me present it, right?" Caleb knelt to his son's level, his heart breaking as he saw the trust and anticipation in those green eyes so like his own. "Noah, something's happened with Daddy's work." "No." Elise's voice cut through from the kitchen doorway, her tone carrying an authority that would have been amusing under different circumstances. "You promised." She stood with her arms crossed, still in her pajamas but radiating the indignation of someone who'd heard this conversation before. Not with him, but in the abstract stories Maren must have told about fathers who made promises they couldn't keep. "Let me talk to your daddy for a minute," Maren said gently, guiding the children toward the kitchen. "Finish your breakfast, and then we'll figure everything out." On the front porch, away from small ears, Caleb explained the crisis. Maren listened without interruption, her expression growing more guarded with each detail. "So you have to go back," she said when he finished. It wasn't a question. "I don't know. Maybe. The board is pressuring me to fly to New York tonight, then Shanghai tomorrow. It could be a week, maybe 2 before." "Caleb," Maren's voice was quiet but firm, "I've seen this pattern before. Crisis after crisis, each one more urgent than the last. There will always be a Shanghai deal, always be a competitor trying to steal your business, always be a board demanding your immediate attention. This is different. Is it? Because Noah has been talking about this presentation for 2 weeks. He practiced with you last night, worked on his poster every evening, told his teacher that his daddy was coming to help him explain the solar system." Her eyes flashed with protective anger. "And Elise has been planning what dress to wear to daddy-daughter lunch tomorrow since the moment you agreed to come." The weight of their expectations settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. He thought about Noah's careful drawings, Elise's excited chatter about introducing him to her friends, the way both children had started saying, "when daddy comes over," instead of "if." "I could postpone the trip until next week," he said, though he knew Marcus would probably have a coronary at the suggestion. "Could you? Or would there be another emergency next week, another critical meeting the week after?" Maren studied his face carefully. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Are you here because you want to be a father, or because you feel guilty about missing the first 3 years?" The question hit like a physical blow. "That's not fair, isn't it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying to fit fatherhood around your real life instead of making it your real life." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I won't let you do this to them, Caleb. I won't let you become the dad who shows up when it's convenient and disappears when business calls." Through the window, they could see Noah carefully packing his project materials while Elise helped by adding unnecessary but artistic touches to his poster. Their teamwork was unconscious, the kind of collaboration that came from sharing every day of their short lives. "What if I stayed?" Caleb asked suddenly. "What if I told the board to handle Shanghai without me?" Maren's expression softened slightly. "Is that what you want? Or is that what you think I want to hear?" Before he could answer, his phone rang. Marcus again, probably with more dire updates about Zhang's ultimatum. Caleb declined the call, but the damage was done. Maren had seen him hesitate, seen the internal struggle between the life he'd built and the life he was trying to create. "Go," she said quietly. "Handle your crisis. But Caleb, when you come back, if you come back, it has to be for good. No more temporary visits, no more testing the waters. These children deserve a father who chooses them first, not one who fits them in between board meetings." "And us?" he asked, knowing he had no right to the question but unable to stop himself. Maren's smile was sad and knowing. "There is no us until you figure out who you are. The man I fell in love with had ambition, but he also had room in his heart for more than quarterly projections. If that man still exists, if he can choose love over leverage, then maybe we can talk about us." Inside, Noah was waiting by the door with his backpack and poster, ready for school and his big presentation. Elise sat on the stairs, no longer chattering about lunch plans, her stuffed elephant clutched tightly against her chest. Caleb knelt between them, pulling both children into his arms. "I have to go away for a little while," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want you to know that leaving you is the hardest thing I've ever had to do." "Are you coming back?" Noah asked, his analytical mind cutting straight to the essential question. "I'm going to try," Caleb promised. then immediately hated himself for the qualification. Children deserved certainty, not corporate hedging. Elise buried her face against his shoulder. "I don't want you to go," she whispered. "I don't want to go either, baby girl. But sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices." As he stood to leave, Noah suddenly ran to his backpack and pulled out a small toy dinosaur, a brontosaurus that Caleb had helped him pick out during a museum gift shop visit. "Take this," Noah said, pressing the toy into Caleb's hand. "So you remember us while you're gone." The gesture nearly undid him completely. Caleb tucked the dinosaur into his jacket pocket, where he could feel its weight against his chest. "I could never forget you," he promised. "Either of you. You're the most important thing in my world." But as he drove away from the house, seeing Mar and Comfort both crying children in his rearview mirror, Caleb wondered if he'd just proven the opposite. The flight to New York was booked for that evening. Shanghai the following day. His old life was calling him back with the siren song of corporate success and financial dominance. But Noah's dinosaur sat heavy in his pocket, and Elise's tears burned in his memory. And for the first time in his professional career, Caleb Harrington wasn't sure which choice would actually cost him more. The first-class cabin of Flight 1247 to JFK felt like a luxurious prison as it taxied down the runway at Tampa International. Caleb sat in seat 3A, the same seat he'd occupied on countless business trips over the past decade, but everything felt different now. The leather was too cold, the champagne offered by the flight attendant tasted bitter, and the familiar hum of engines carried him away from the only thing that had ever truly mattered. Noah's dinosaur sat on the tray table in front of him, its plastic surface worn smooth by small hands that had loved it completely. Caleb traced the toy's outline with his finger, remembering how his son had pressed it into his palm with such solemn trust. "So you remember us while you're gone," as if he could ever forget. His phone buzzed with messages from Marcus. Zhang's team confirmed the Shanghai meeting for tomorrow at 9 a.m. local time. "Car will meet you at JFK. Board is relieved you're coming back." The relief felt like acid in his throat. For 4 years, board approval had been his drug of choice, quarterly growth his measure of self-worth. Now it seemed like the consolation prize in a game where he'd lost everything that actually counted. The plane reached cruising altitude, and Caleb closed his eyes. But instead of corporate strategies, he saw Elise's face crumpling as he explained he had to leave. He heard Noah's careful question, "Are you coming back?" He felt the weight of Marin's disappointment, heavier than any business failure he'd ever endured. 2 hours into the flight, somewhere over South Carolina, Caleb made a decision that would have seemed impossible 6 weeks ago. He called Marcus. "Change of plans," Caleb said when his CFO answered. "Set up a video conference with Zhang. Full presentation capabilities, real-time documentation sharing, the works. Caleb, we've been through this. Zhang doesn't do video conferences for deals this size. He wants, then we give him something better. We give him honesty." Caleb's voice carried the certainty that had built his empire, but now served a different purpose. "Tell him I have family obligations that prevent me from traveling to Shanghai, but that I'm prepared to offer him terms no competitor can match." Marcus's silence stretched for several heartbeats. "Family obligations? Caleb, this is an $800 million deal. I know exactly what it is, and I know what my children are worth. Set up the call, Marcus. If Zhang walks, he walks. But I'm not missing my daughter's daddy-daughter lunch for any amount of money." After hanging up, Caleb flagged down a flight attendant. "I need to change my destination," he said. "Is there any way to get off this plane and catch the next flight back to Tampa?" The attendant looked confused. "Sir, we're already in the air. The next opportunity to change flights would be when we land in New York. Then that's what I'll do." 3 hours later, Caleb was running through JFK Airport like a man possessed. Noah's dinosaur clutched in his hand as he searched for the next flight south. The corporate car Marcus had arranged sat idle at the curb while Caleb purchased a ticket on the last flight back to Tampa, departing in 45 minutes. During the layover, he called Marin. It went straight to voicemail. She was probably putting the children to bed, maintaining the routine that had become their anchor in a world where fathers sometimes disappeared without warning. "Marin, it's me," he said, his voice echoing in the busy terminal. "I'm coming back. Tonight. I know you said not to call unless I was ready to choose them first, and I am. I'm choosing them first. I'm choosing all of you first. The Shanghai deal can wait, the board can wait, the whole damn empire can wait. I should have realized 4 years ago that none of it matters if I don't have someone to share it with." He paused, watching other travelers rush past him, business executives like he used to be rushing toward meetings and acquisitions that would be forgotten in 5 years. Meanwhile, Somewhere in Florida, two small children were falling asleep wondering if their father would keep his promises. "I'll be at Noah's school tomorrow morning for his space presentation," he continued, "and I'll be at Elise's daddy-daughter lunch. And every day after that if you'll let me. Because I finally understand what you tried to tell me 4 years ago. Love doesn't wait for convenient moments. Family doesn't pause while you chase the next deal. And I refuse to miss another day of my children's lives for anything." The flight back to Tampa felt like the longest 3 hours of his life, but also like a journey home in the truest sense. Caleb spent the time crafting emails to his board, restructuring his involvement in the Shanghai deal, and making arrangements that he should have made weeks ago. By midnight, he was back in his Florida hotel room, but sleep was impossible. Instead, he sat on the balcony overlooking the Gulf of Mexico, Noah's dinosaur in his palm, planning not corporate strategies but how to be present for a 3-year-old's lunch date and a 3-year-old's space presentation. At 6 a.m., he was standing outside Marin's front door with coffee, fresh bagels, and a determination that felt different from any he'd experienced in the business world. This wasn't about winning or dominating or proving his worth. It was about showing up. Marin answered the door in her robe, her hair tousled from sleep, her expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been hope. "You came back," she said, as if she couldn't quite believe it. "I promised I would try, but trying isn't good enough for them, and it isn't good enough for you." He held up the dinosaur. "Noah asked me to remember you while I was gone, but I realized I don't want to remember you from a distance anymore. I want to be here, making new memories every day." Before Marin could respond, the sound of small feet thundering downstairs filled the morning air. Noah appeared first, already dressed for school, his space project poster carefully rolled under his arm. "Daddy," his face lit up with pure joy. "You came back for my presentation. I wouldn't miss it for anything," Caleb said, kneeling to embrace his son. "Not for any meeting, any deal, any amount of money in the world." Elise appeared moments later, still in her pajamas but carrying the red dress she'd selected for their lunch date. "Are we still having daddy-daughter lunch?" she asked, her voice small with the caution of someone who'd learned that adult promises sometimes broke. "We're having lunch," Caleb confirmed, "and dinner, and breakfast tomorrow, and every meal you want me to share for the rest of your life, if you'll have me." Over breakfast, as Noah practiced his presentation one final time, and Elise chattered about her lunch plans, Caleb explained his decision to Marin. "I restructured the Shanghai deal for remote management, gave Marcus broader authority over day-to-day operations. Told the board I'm relocating permanently to Florida." He met her eyes across the kitchen table. "I'm buying a house here, Marin, close enough to be part of their daily lives, far enough away to respect the boundaries you've set. This isn't a visit anymore. This is me choosing a new life." Marin was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if looking for cracks in his resolve. "What about your empire?" she asked finally. "It'll survive without my constant attention, or it won't. Either way, it won't matter if I don't have you and Noah and Elise to share it with." He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close enough to feel the warmth of possibility. "I love them, Marin. More than I knew it was possible to love anything. And I love you, not the way I loved you 4 years ago, when I was too selfish to put you first, but the way I should have loved you then, with everything I have." For the first time since he'd returned to Florida, Marin smiled. Really smiled. Not the careful expression she'd worn while protecting her heart and her children. "We'll take it slow," she said, "for their sake and mine. But Caleb, I'm glad you came back. We're all glad you came back." 3 hours later, Caleb stood in front of Noah's kindergarten class, helping his son explain the wonders of Jupiter's moons to 25 fascinated 5-year-olds. And that afternoon, he sat across from Elise in the school cafeteria, listening to her introduce him to her friends as "my daddy who came all the way back from New York just to have lunch with me." For the first time in 4 years, Caleb Harrington was exactly where he belonged. 18 months after Caleb's return, the house on Maple Street in Clearwater had become everything he'd never known he wanted. Not the sprawling mansion his Manhattan penthouse had been, but a real home where small bicycles cluttered the driveway. Finger paintings covered the refrigerator, and every room held evidence of lives being lived fully and messily and beautifully together. This Saturday morning found Caleb in the kitchen at 7 a.m., attempting to master the art of pancakes while Noah provided detailed instructions from his perch on a step stool, and Elise added her own creative suggestions about rainbow sprinkles. "Daddy, you have to wait for the bubbles before you flip them," Noah said seriously, watching the griddle with scientific intensity. Mama taught me that. And they need faces, Elise added, bouncing on her toes. Happy pancake faces. Caleb smiled, using the batter to create lopsided smiley faces that delighted his daughter, and earned Noah's grudging approval for artistic effort, if not technical precision. These Saturday morning breakfasts had become sacred ritual. No phones, no emails, just flour-dusted chaos and the kind of joy that couldn't be scheduled or optimized. Maren appeared in the doorway wearing one of his old NYU t-shirts and a pair of shorts, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Even after all these months of careful courtship, of slowly rebuilding trust and learning each other again, the sight of her in his clothes still made his breath catch. Something smells like it's burning, she observed, trying not to smile. Daddy made experimental pancakes, Elise announced proudly. Some are crispy. That's a diplomatic way to put it, Caleb said, sliding a perfectly golden pancake onto Elise's plate and a slightly charred one onto his own. I'm still learning. We all are, Maren said softly, and something in her tone made him look up from the griddle to meet her eyes. There was warmth there, and affection, and something deeper that they'd been approaching gradually, carefully, like two people learning to trust again. After breakfast, they loaded into Caleb's new SUV. Practical, safe, with built-in car seats and enough space for all the equipment required to transport two active preschoolers anywhere, for their weekly adventure. Today's destination, the Florida Aquarium in Tampa, where Noah could indulge his current obsession with marine biology, and Elise could watch the sea turtles that never failed to make her squeal with delight. The drive south along the coast had become one of Caleb's favorite parts of the week. Noah would provide running commentary on everything they passed, from construction projects to interesting cloud formations. Elise would sing elaborate songs she made up on the spot, usually involving mermaids and dolphins and magical underwater kingdoms, and Maren would look out the window with that peaceful expression she wore when she was completely content, completely present. Daddy, do you think octopuses are smarter than dolphins? Noah asked as they crossed the Bay Bridge. What do you think? Caleb replied, having learned that his son's questions were often the beginning of complex theories he'd been developing. I think they're different kinds of smart. Octopuses can solve puzzles, but dolphins can talk to each other. Like how Elise is smart about colors and I'm smart about numbers. From her car seat, Elise nodded sagely. I'm very smart about colors, and also about princess dresses. Those are both very important kinds of smart, Caleb agreed, catching Maren's amused smile in the rearview mirror. At the aquarium, they fell into the rhythm they'd developed over months of family outings. Caleb would lift both children to see over crowds. Maren would read information plaques aloud in voices that brought sea creatures to life, and together they'd watch Noah and Elise discover wonders that made their eyes wide with amazement. Look, Mama, the seahorse daddy takes care of the babies. Elise pressed her face against the glass, watching the delicate creatures float through artificial kelp. That's right, sweetheart. In seahorse families, the daddies are the ones who carry the eggs and protect them until they're ready to swim on their own. Caleb felt Maren's hand slip into his as they watched their daughter absorb this information with the serious concentration she brought to everything that mattered to her. The touch was casual, natural, the kind of unconscious intimacy that had been building between them week by week, conversation by conversation, shared responsibility by shared responsibility. I want to be a seahorse daddy when I grow up, Elise announced. They're very good at taking care of their babies. I think you'd be excellent at taking care of babies, Caleb said, kneeling beside her. You already take such good care of your stuffed animals. As they moved through the exhibits, Caleb found himself storing up moments the way he used to collect quarterly reports. But these memories were infinitely more precious than any profit margin. Noah's face lighting up as he learned about bioluminescent jellyfish, Elise giggling as she watched penguins waddle across their habitat, Maren explaining marine ecosystems with the same passion she brought to everything she cared about. During lunch at the aquarium cafe, while the children were occupied with fish-shaped chicken nuggets and fruit cups, Maren reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. I have something to tell you, she said, her voice carrying a nervous excitement he hadn't heard in years. Caleb's heart stopped. In the past 6 months, conversations that started with those words had covered everything from parent-teacher conferences to weekend plans. But something in her expression suggested this was different. Remember how we talked about taking things slow? About making sure this was really working before we made any big changes? He nodded, suddenly unable to speak. Well, I think we've proven it's working. You've been here every day for 6 months. You've never missed a school play, a soccer game, or a bedtime story. You've helped with homework and middle-of-the-night stomach bugs and tantrums at the grocery store. Her smile grew wider. You've become the father they needed and the partner I always hoped you could be. Maren, I'm not finished, she said, laughing softly. What I'm trying to say is, I think we're ready for you to move in. Really move in. Not just weekends and dinner visits, but every morning and every evening and every ordinary Tuesday when nothing special is happening but we're together anyway. The words hit him with more force than any business victory ever had. For months, he'd been living in a rented condo 15 minutes away, close enough to be present but far enough to respect the boundaries Maren had needed to rebuild her trust. The arrangement had worked, but it had also served as a constant reminder that this was still provisional, still a trial period where he could be dismissed if he failed to live up to his promises. Are you sure? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Because once I move in, I'm never leaving again. Not for Shanghai deals or board meetings or any crisis that doesn't involve our family. I'm sure, she said simply. We're sure. All of us. As if summoned by the conversation, Noah looked up from his chicken nuggets. Are you talking about Daddy living with us all the time? Both adults turned to him in surprise. How did you? Maren began. I heard you talking to Grandma on the phone yesterday, Noah said matter-of-factly. You said Daddy was ready to be a real family member instead of just a visitor. Elise's eyes widened with excitement. Daddy's going to live with us every day, even on Tuesdays? Even on Tuesdays, Caleb confirmed, pulling both children into his arms. If that's okay with you. Yes, Elise shouted, loudly enough to draw amused glances from other families. Can you make pancakes every Saturday? And read stories every night? And help me pick out my clothes every morning? I can do all of that and more, Caleb promised. Can you help me with my science projects? Noah asked, always practical in his planning. Every single one. That evening, after the children were asleep and they sat on the porch swing Caleb had installed last month, Maren curled against his side with the comfortable ease that had gradually replaced the careful distance they'd maintained. There's one more thing, she said, her voice soft in the gathering dusk. If you tell me we're having another baby, I might actually faint, Caleb said, only half joking. Maren laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet neighborhood where other families were settling into evening routines. Not yet, but someday maybe, if you're interested in expanding the family business. The family business? This, she said, gesturing toward the house where their children slept safely, toward the life they'd built from the ashes of their broken marriage. Love, partnership, raising humans who will change the world simply by being kind to it. Caleb pressed his lips to the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo and the newer scent of home that had become his anchor. I can't think of any business I'd rather be in, he said. As stars appeared over the Florida sky and the gentle sound of waves carried across the evening air, Caleb Harrington realized he'd finally achieved the one success that mattered. He'd built a life worth living, with people worth loving, in a place that would always welcome him home. In his pocket, Noah's dinosaur, now joined by a collection of other small treasures his children had given him over the months, served as a reminder of how far he'd traveled from the man who'd once measured worth in profit margins and quarterly growth. Some empires were built on ambition and acquisition. The best ones were built on love. 2 years later, the sound of children's laughter drifted through the open windows of the house on Maple Street as Caleb Harrington stood in what had once been his home office, now converted into a playroom where creativity took precedence over quarterly reports. Finger paintings covered the walls where stock charts used to hang, and the massive oak desk that had once dominated corporate meetings now served as headquarters for elaborate Lego construction projects and weekend tea parties. At 44, Caleb bore little resemblance to the man who'd once measured success in profit margins and board approval. The expensive suits had been replaced by comfortable jeans and t-shirts that could survive finger paint accidents and impromptu water balloon fights. The perpetually tense expression had softened into something approaching peace, carved by thousands of bedtime stories, school pickups, and Saturday morning pancake disasters. Through the window he could see Maren in the backyard garden, her pregnancy just beginning to show beneath the flowing sundress she wore. At 7 weeks along, they'd only told the children last weekend, resulting in an explosion of excitement from Elise and serious questions from Noah about whether the baby would prefer dinosaurs or princesses. Both, had been Caleb's diplomatic answer. Babies are very open-minded about these things. Now Noah and Elise, nearly 6 years old and bursting with the confidence that came from being absolutely secure in their parents' love, were helping Maren plant tomatoes while debating the merits of various baby names. Their suggestions ranged from practical, Michael Sarah, to fantastical, Sparkles Dragon, with Noah approaching the task like a scientific expedition and Elise treating it like an artistic endeavor. "Daddy," Elise's voice called from the garden. "Come see our baby tomato plants. Noah says they're like the baby in Mama's tummy. They need lots of love to grow big and strong." Caleb stepped outside into the Florida sunshine, leaving behind the laptop where he'd been reviewing the latest quarterly reports from his company, a business that now ran beautifully under Marcus's expanded leadership, requiring Caleb's input only a few hours each week. The Shanghai deal had eventually gone through via video conference, proving that presence and profit weren't mutually exclusive when you had the right priorities. "Show me these famous baby tomatoes," he said, settling into the garden dirt without concern for his clothes, a gesture that would have horrified his former self but delighted his current family. Noah pointed to tiny green shoots with the enthusiasm he brought to all scientific discoveries. "See how small they are now? But if we water them every day and make sure they get sunshine, they'll grow into big tomato plants that make food for the whole family. Just like how we take care of Mama and the baby," Elise added, patting Maren's still flat belly with the gentle reverence she'd learned over the past week. "Love makes everything grow better." Maren caught Caleb's eye over their children's heads, her smile carrying the contentment of a woman who'd rebuilt her life from heartbreak and discovered something even better than what she'd lost. They'd remarried 6 months ago in a simple ceremony in their backyard, with Noah as ring bearer and Elise as flower girl, surrounded by friends who'd watched them journey back to each other with the patient wisdom that comes from raising children together. "How are the quarterly projections looking?" Maren asked, nodding toward the laptop he'd abandoned. "Up 12% over last quarter," Caleb replied automatically, then paused, struck by how little that number affected him now. "But more importantly, how are you feeling? Any morning sickness today?" "Better, the crackers are helping." She leaned into his shoulder as they watched their children carefully water each plant, with the dedicated focus they brought to everything they considered important. "Noah's been reading pregnancy books from the library. Yesterday he informed me that the baby is currently the size of a blueberry and developing neural pathways." Of course he did. Caleb's pride in his son's intellectual curiosity mixed with amazement that he'd nearly missed witnessing this brilliant mind develop. "And what's Elise's latest theory about the baby?" "She's convinced it's going to be a mermaid who will need a special swimming pool in the nursery." Maren's laugh carried the easy joy that had become the soundtrack of their rebuilt life. "I haven't had the heart to explain the biological impossibilities." "Why would you? Some of life's best surprises come from believing in impossibilities." That evening, as they sat around the dinner table that had become the center of their universe, Noah made an announcement that stopped all conversation. "I want to tell you something important," he said with the gravity he brought to significant declarations. "Today at school, Mrs. Patterson asked us to write about our heroes. Everyone wrote about superheroes or famous people, but I wrote about Daddy." Caleb's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "You did?" "Yes. Because you're the only person I know who was sad and then decided to become happy. And you didn't use magic or superpowers. You just chose to love us more than anything else. That's harder than flying or being strong." The words hit Caleb with unexpected force, carrying him back to that moment on the beach 2 years ago, when he'd first seen Noah and Elise, and realized his entire life had been reorganized around 2 small people he'd never known existed. The journey from that moment to this one, through rebuilding trust, learning to prioritize love over ambition, and discovering that the most important success couldn't be measured in spreadsheets, had been the hardest and most worthwhile challenge he'd ever undertaken. "Can I tell you a secret?" Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion. "You and your sister and your mama saved me. I didn't know how lost I was until I found you." Elise, never to be outdone in declarations of affection, climbed into his lap and wrapped her arms around his neck. "We're the best family in the whole world," she announced with the absolute certainty that made everything she said sound like scientific fact. "We really are," Maren agreed, reaching across the table to take Caleb's hand. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the dishes were done and the house had settled into the peaceful quiet that only comes when everyone you love is safely under the same roof, Caleb and Maren sat on their porch swing, watching fireflies dance across the yard. "Do you ever miss it?" Maren asked softly. "The empire? The power? The adrenaline of closing billion-dollar deals?" Caleb considered the question seriously, as he did all of her inquiries into his emotional landscape. 2 years ago, he would have said the business was his identity, that success in the corporate world was the only measure that mattered. Now, with his wife's hand in his and his children's artwork covering his walls and a new baby growing in the woman he'd loved enough to lose and fight to win back, the answer was surprisingly clear. I miss the simplicity of it sometimes, he admitted. Problems that could be solved with spreadsheets and strategy sessions. But I wouldn't trade a single morning pancake disaster or bedtime story or parent-teacher conference for all the quarterly growth in the world. This messy, complicated, beautiful life we've built. This is what success actually looks like. As if summoned by their conversation, Noah appeared in the doorway in his dinosaur pajamas, clutching the worn stuffed animal he'd given Caleb during those first terrifying weeks of learning to be a father. I had a bad dream, he said quietly. Without hesitation, both parents made room on the swing, welcoming their son into the circle of warmth and safety they'd created together. Soon after, Elise joined them, drawn by some sibling radar that detected comfort happening without her. They sat together in the Florida night, a family of 4 that would soon be 5, watching stars appear over the water and listening to the gentle sounds of a neighborhood full of other families settling into evening routines. Caleb thought about the man he'd been 2 years ago, driven, successful, utterly alone in a penthouse that represented everything he'd thought he wanted. That man would never have believed this simple moment could be worth more than any corporate triumph. Daddy? Elise's sleepy voice interrupted his thoughts. Yes, baby. Are you happy you came back to us? The question was simple, asked with the directness only children possessed, but it carried the weight of everything they'd built together. Caleb looked at his daughter's trusting face, at Noah already falling asleep against his shoulder, at Marin whose love had given him the chance to become the man he'd always had the potential to be. Happier than I ever knew was possible, he said honestly. As the children drifted off to sleep in their parents' arms and Marin's head found its familiar place against Caleb's shoulder, he realized that some journeys take you around the world, only to discover that home was waiting exactly where you started. You just had to be brave enough to choose it. The fireflies continued their ancient dance across the yard, tiny lights in the darkness, each one a reminder that the most beautiful things in life often required patience, faith, and the willingness to believe that second chances could become something even more precious than first loves. Sometimes the greatest success comes not from building an empire, but from having the courage to tear down the walls you've built around your heart and choose love over everything else that seems important, but ultimately isn't. When faced with the choice between professional achievement and personal happiness, between the empire you've built and the family you've found, what would you choose? Would you have the strength to walk away from everything you thought defined you to discover who you were truly meant to become? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.